Police officers of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment? Had a call come out as a crash without injuries. Rolled up to the call with my partner, myself, and another unit. The guy had crashed into his own front yard, but there was no property damage. When I tried to get the guy to sign a crash statement, he told me he didn't want to and that he hadn't slept for 10 days. Then he told my partner that he had just gotten out of the hospital after an evaluation. It was cold outside, so we let him sit in the back of my buddy's cruiser while he filled out the statement of what happened. He kept making statements like, "Just kill me, man," and "Guys, just blow my head off right here." My partner called the hospital to make sure he didn't escape or something, and the guy wasn't going to receive a citation at all since it was his own property that got damaged. Just a tow to his driveway, which was right there. And that's all. While walking back to the back of the cruiser to let him out, the guy pushed open the door when my partner opened it and yelled, "Let's go, motherfuckers," before attempting to tackle my partner. All three of us jumped on top of him and began trying to hold him down while he kept screaming. He then reached up and bit my partner on the arm. We got him in cuffs, then transported him to the hospital where we had to fight with him 2 more times in the hospital, and he bit a nurse. Everyone was okay, and it ended up being that he was just mentally unstable. No drugs involved. We were looking for a guy who stole guns from his ex and found him under a pile of clothes in a closet at a different house. Unfortunately, there was like 7 kids sleeping in the same room, so I start getting them out of there while my partner cuffs the guy who is pretending to sleep. We decide to drag him out, and I go to move the mattress to get it out of the way, and we find the stolen guns under where the kids were sleeping. I pulled up on a teen sleeping in a vehicle at the end of a country road. When I ran the license plate, I found out that he was reported as a runaway. The doors on the vehicle were locked, so I knocked on the window to wake him up. Once he woke up and realized what was going on, he shot himself in the mouth with a rifle he had hidden under his blanket. Rough way to start my shift. My brother committed suicide, and the cop who was called to scene has reached out to us many times over the years. He cut him down and tried to save him. My mom once made the remarks, "Imagine if we had had to cut him down." Thank you for handling society at its worst. We love and appreciate you. Was doing a welfare check at a house for a suicidal male. Only person living at the house. Car in driveway, and house was locked up. Gathered some more info and was told where a key was. Opened the door. Announced myself and starting searching the house expecting to find a dead body. Opened a closet door and the guy was hiding in there with a rifle next to him. If he wanted me dead, I would not be typing this. Dude was having some issues. Sat and talked for about half an hour. Told me he heard me but did not want to talk to anyone. Got him the help he needed. Edit. Whoa. This is overwhelming. Thank you all for the responses and kind words of encouragement. I will do my best to slowly work through some of the questions I see. I was a rookie cop in a small town. I was driving to a check on a report of a large group of kids causing a disturbance at a school parking lot late at night. I realized I had not tested my PA speaker, which I planned on using to disperse the crowd. On my way to the call, slowly rolling down a residential street at 2 AM with my windows down, I decide to tap my PA mic a couple times to check it. First 2 taps. Can't tell if it's working. I slow down. I tap the mic several more times. Definitely hear the loudspeakers that time. At that moment, I hear, "What the fuck are you doing?" I look out my passenger window and see this old dude sitting on his porch in his underwear, looking pissed. Our eyes locked. I realized I had no decent excuse for clicking my loudspeaker in a quiet neighborhood in the middle of the night. So I didn't say anything back to him and I floored it up the road. Definitely an oh shit moment at the time. Maybe different than what OP is looking for, but I get tired of traditional war stories. The awkward on this encounter was through the roof. Not myself personally, but my father. I've heard this story hundreds of times over the years and this seems like the perfect time to share it. My father was a Miami-Dade County sheriff in the 80s. One of the first rookies pulled from the academy straight to Miami. All the time he tells me how police officers are all control freaks. His so shit moment was when he lost control. On his way home from a shift one day he overheard a call on the radio about a convenience store robbery right near where he was. He radio sawed in and said Hassad check it out as he was still in uniform. Still had shirt, pants and badge. But gun belt had been removed. As he searched the streets he spotted a vehicle matching the description and proceeded to call it in and throw on his lights to pull them over. As he pulled them over, 2 kids got out and ran. The driver stayed behind. With no gun belt on, my father proceeded out of his cruiser and holstered his weapon in his waistband. He then took the driver out of their car and moved them to the hood of his. As he searched the driver over his hood he said he felt the moment happen. The driver started to swing his arm around and proceeded to elbow my father in the face. He lost all control. Oh shit. They wrestled to the ground where eventually my father's weapon was knocked loose. The driver proceeded to pick up the weapon and shoot my father point blank in the lung with his own weapon. The driver escaped, but only for a brief period of time, and my father was blessed to have one of the top GSW doctors surgeons in the country doing a seminar about 20 minutes away on the same day. He lives to tell the tale today, and I'm pretty sure the pose who shot him just got released last year. As a rookie I was responding to an alarm at restaurant that was supposed to be haunted by a woman. The first officer that arrived was an older officer that didn't do much and didn't ever get excited on the radio. As soon as he arrived he asked for a second unit in a high-pitched tone. As I pulled in he had his shotgun out and he was leaned up over his hood. My first thought was, so shit, someone is breaking in. When I ran up to him and asked what up, all he said was as he pulled up and his lights hit the building, a woman jumped off the roof and disappeared. He was clearly shook. Me and another officer checked the building and found no evidence that someone had been there. It made an impression on me and I never went back to the restaurant at night without another officer. Does it count if it was my dad? Mom took me and my siblings to the doctor one day. Turned off her cell as per Dr. Assos' office policy back then. Fast forward a few hours. We pull up to our house and there's a cop car waiting for us in the driveway. Not my dad's sauce. Anyone with family in law enforcement knows having a cop at your door that isn't out your loved one is something you never want to experience. Long story short, my dad's flashbang malfunctioned and detonated in his pocket during a call out. He was SWAT. Definitely an so shit moment for him and everyone in the back of that van. He very nearly bled out and they cold and sought get a hold of my mom. She swears the whole department was in that waiting room when we got there. And my dad lived to tell the tale. Love him. Edit. Sorry to do the cheesy after post edit. But I had to say thank you to everyone for all the kind words. You didn't have to take time to say nice things about my dad. But you did, and it seriously means so much. Thanks for existing, friends. I'm not a cop. But my younger brother is. On his first night out of field training. So the first night he's not riding with an instructor. Him and his equally new partner were heading back to the station at the end of the night around 2 AM. He's driving down a major street and there are 2 SUVs hauling ass the other direction. All of a sudden someone leans out the rear window of the second vehicle and starts firing rounds from a rifle at his car heading opposite direction. Naturally they flip around and give chase. And call it out on the radio. He said it was either the fact that his partner was screaming his head off into the radio, or the fact that it was the 2 rookies getting shot at. But the entire city's police force came down on them in about 2 minutes. They ended up catching both vehicles. Turns out it was some sort of dispute at a bar between the occupants of the SUVs. Vehicle 2 was chasing Vehicle 1. Saw the cops, who had no idea about any of it, coming the other way and decided to take it up a couple notches. A law prof in Australia spent 20 years as a cop before becoming a lawyer and eventually teaching. In explaining the battered wife syndrome defense to murder, he told a story of a call to a little old lady's house where she had said on the phone that she had killed her husband. Before this incident, he didn't really understand why it existed. Why doesn't the woman just leave? Why doesn't she just go to someone else's house? Prof shows up to the door and is greeted by a little old lady saying, "Come in. Would you like some tea?" He goes in and she starts putting some cakes on a tray and pouring tea. He wonders if she's all there. He asked, "So you said that you killed your husband on the phone. Would I be able to see him?" She directs him to the living room where the old man was on a lazy boy chair, bottle in hand, and a tomahawk in his skull. Meanwhile, old lady is asking if he takes sugar or milk in his tea. The prof said at this moment he realized why the defensive battered wife existed. The drunk old guy had been beating her for years, controlled all the money and didn't let her have friends. She had nowhere to go even if she left him. So on this day, after saying he was going to beat her if his sports team lost, she took matters into her own hands. He said this was the moment he realized that sometimes there are situations where life doesn't make sense and people take the only way they can see. First night working and responded to an accident. An intoxicated male was atted by the car and kept telling me his foot hurt when he walked. Every time he stepped you could see the bones in his foot move. Then he told us another person was with him. We looked and seen him sitting across a fence in the field and was sitting down. When I walked up to him he was holding his head. I shined the light and could see his skull. A big piece of scalp was torn off when he was ejected from the car. His forehead was hanging in front of his eyes. I thought I could see something move on his skull, and when I looked closely, it was red ants. He was sitting in a red ant pile and they was all over him. Edit. It was supposed to be sitting, not ding. Second edit. I didn't add the third victim because I was tired and didn't want to type anymore, but there was a third victim. Female, was ejected as well. She was lying beside the car and the first thing I noticed was her hips looked weird. She was lying on her side and she had no hips. Her stomach was distended and she was having trouble breathing. It turns out she crushed her pelvis and the bones went into her abdomen, causing the massive internal bleeding. She survived. Barely. She was life flighted out to another hospital. Was on patrol on night shift. Decided to patrol down a side road that only had a couple of small businesses and a scrapyard. I've been down the road many times and pretty much knew what looked right and what looked wrong. Well, some cars that were sitting at the end of the road were missing their doors, but were still sitting in the same spot they always sat. I parked and got out. Looked around. Didn't notice anything else out of the ordinary and figured they just scraped the doors earlier in the day. Well, the next morning the owner of the scrapyard discovered that the scrapyard had been broken into and someone managed to crank a crane and stole tons of scrap copper and other metals. The suspects were seen on camera during the time I was investigating the cars. They apparently saw my patrol car and me and ran off. One got so excited that he forgot to put the getaway vehicle in park and let it roll. I didn't see nor hear any of this. The suspects took cover in the woods and one had an assault rifle. One of the suspects was actually a well-known athlete with a meth addiction. I could have been killed easily that night if I would have looked around just a little more. My grandfather told me this story when I was asking him about his cop stories. He was an Ontario Provincial Police in a smallish rural town, and there were a series of armed robberies where these two brothers would rob a place and always drive away in the same car. One night on his way home he saw fresh tire tracks going into a farm field and had a feeling. So he turned off and followed them. About 150 meters into the field he sees the car. So he puts his lights on, spotlights the car, and gets out with his sidearm drawn. The car is empty, so he starts looking around and hears movement in the field just out of sight. So he goes back to use his car as cover and shouts that there are other cars around and thieves are surrounded. After a bit of waiting the two guys come out and surrendered. Worked out well enough. When talking to the two guys back at the station, the one brother said they had talked about it and agreed thieves would kill a cop if one ever found them. Apparently when my grandfather was checking out the car and going back to his own, the one brother had him in his sights, but when it came to pull the trigger just couldn't do it. Guy had a decently powerful revolver too, so there's pretty much zero chance granddad would have survived it. Not a police officer but a good shit moment. We went to a home for a welfare check. Late at night. PD was dispatched as well. But we got to the house and found the front door unlocked. The house was completely dark and we couldn't find a light switch before we saw a man standing in a doorway. with his head kind of cocked to the side. A little startled we said, "6Q's us sir for barging in. But we got called for a welfare check for you." C just fucking stood there, staring at us without saying a fucking word. In the dark. It was like he was trying to scare us. As I scrambled for my light, my partner fucking bails. I'm backing out of the house, still trying to get this guy to say something. When I finally see the light switch, bam. Light comes on and I see the patient hanging from a wire in the doorway to his kitchen. For that 20-30 seconds I honestly thought that this guy was just fucking with us. I didn't sleep for a couple of nights after that call. I have a few. I've got about 5 years on in a medium-sized city. My first was while I was in field training. Call for a possible overdose. I went into the basement of the house while my trainer was grabbing his medical stuff. I got down there right as this dude high on bath salts started to come to. He went straight to tackling me and tried taking my gun. I was able to keep him from breaking my weapon retention and fight until my trainer got there and we got him cuffed up. My second was hearing a medical only call for a 6-month-old not breathing. I happened to be 2 blocks away. I got there and started CPR until EMS arrived. The kid ended up not making it, and to this day I think about it a lot. I hate running medical calls, but a lot of times we respond so much faster than fire and EMS. My third was a traffic stop on the interstate. Make contact with the driver who is obviously drunk. I get him out of the car and tell him to face away from me so I can pat him down. As I'm going to start, I ask him if he has anything on him. He starts to pull away and his hand shoots to his waistband. That's when I see the outline of the gun. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, but I was able to grab him and push him against my car and pull the gun from him. He ended up being like a 200 back and having Xanax in his system. I think if he had been sober he would have been quicker and it could be a different story. Not a cop but a CO in a minimum security prison. I just got back from dinner service, and I get a call to head to building X. I was a floater that day. I walk in and see a inmate beat to hell. He had 3 fist-sized lumps on his head. Both eyes black and swollen. Lips busted. Literal boot prints on his back and chest. They literally beat the shit out of him. I'm not joking, he shit himself and turd was laying in the yard. He was jumped out of a gang because he didn't want to stab a guy. When we bring him to medical to SGTS, ALT, and the head nurse all gasped at the same time when he walked in. He went to the hospital, had a broken rib. It was the first time I realized the inmates are actually dangerous. TL. Dr. inmate, he the literal shit beat out of him so he didn't have to stab a guy. Not me, but a former professor I had for a social deviance class. She got called in for a welfare check as no one in the apartments next door had seen their neighbor for about a week. Yet his lights and TV were on the whole time. Apparently, this was highly unusual as according to the neighbors he had been a pretty personable guy. When she got in the apartment she found that the individual had hung himself unintentionally while masturbating in a scuba suit, complete with snorkel and harpoon gun, with a cutout for his junk. The suit was bloated 2-3 times its normal size. Someone happened to bump the guy and the suit farted. In her words, there were no co-workers or EMTs that day. Only things in between her and the door. I don't know if it's odd call it an so shit's moment, but it stands out. Call of a burglary in progress. It was late. About 4:35 AM and we got off at 6:30. So nobody really wanted to go to this. Anyways, I go with a handful of other guys. All we knew was someone was breaking the windows in from the backyard. As I pull up, 2 people come running up from inside saying someone has entered the home. We set up with a couple more guys, and my corporal looks through the wood fence to see what he sees. Blood everywhere and a man face up on the ground. We make entry, and Hassos dead. I never figured out who he was, but our best guess was he got high on meth and thought this was his pad and tried to break in when he cold and opened the door. Had a great gash in the bend of his arm where the glass from the window cut him. He didn't die quickly. There was blood all over the backyard, particularly where the door was that he was trying to get into. Luckily, we had an actual homicide earlier that night. So CAP detectives were already there and were able to come to the scene to handle it. One more recently was where 4 gangsters tried to rob the wrong guy. And he shot all 4 of them. 3 headshots. 1 dead gangster right on the sidewalk. It was raining too, so it looked just like the movies where the blood was running down the street. I work in an aggressive city. Paramedic here. Not an officer. But I probably know this one officer's saw shits moment. Went on a psychiatric call out in the rural area of our zone. Ended up being a hanging. Super eerie vibe. It was dusk out. Cool fall breeze. Remote house with a single tree in front of it and nothing around for miles. House had a very long, very steep driveway. As you drive up, you see the silhouette of a man hanging from the tree. Looked like Halloween decoration. I was first on scene and advised our dispatch of what I had. We use separate dispatches from the sheriff's department. And he hadn't received the update yet. He rolls up and quite literally says Jesus fucking Christs. Rookie deputy. Hassos actually a good friend of mine. One of the things I would never, ever recommend one to see in person. So surreal. Lifeless body just swaying in the wind. I was watching over a guy at the hospital and all of a sudden it looks like he was fingering his asshole. He then proceeds to jack off. My partner and I go in with nurses and we tell the guy to show us his hands. He pulls out one hand and it was fine. We tell him to bring out the other hand slowly and it was just covered in shit. The nurses get him cleaned up and maybe half an hour later he starts doing it again. This time we somewhat stop him in time. I asked him if he needed to go to the bathroom, to which he nodded. I retrieved a nurse and they started walking to the bathroom. This man held his finger in his butthole the whole way to the bathroom, but that wasn't enough of a plug, so he started dropping little Hershey kisses of poops. It was later decided that he needed to go to a mental facility. P.S. He had told us he had gotten rid of a gun earlier, so they then sent a couple of our guys on a wild goose chase to find it, which they did. Not my own story. But I used to work with a guy who was in the police but hit burnout after seeing a lot of shit and jumped careers. He told me a story where he got a call about an apparent dead body in the underground. Some teenage girl had dead on the train. But because she was propped up in her seat, nobody noticed she was dead. She's been riding around the train's route for hours and, because of how impersonal we are as a society, nobody even looked in her direction and noticed she was quite clearly dead. He saw the security camera footage from the train and described it as like something out of a horror movie. Playing through the footage and seeing people coming on and coming off the train in fast forward, winking in and out of the shot, while she just sat there, completely motionless. As the clock zoomed through hours of video. And nobody realizing they were sharing the carriage with a corpse. Actually another one which is a bit creepy too, wrote a guy a DUI one night. Towed his car and seized his license. Serving him with the form from the DMV which says that his license has been seized and that he has to show up to a hearing to determine whether the license will be suspended. Like any good form. The DMV form has boxes where I fill out this GUI sauce information and carbon copies so I can keep a copy with the report. A few days later a buddy of mine finds me. He got dispatched to a call of a suicide in the park. Man was found hanging from a tree. They identified him by the DMV form I had served him with, which was still in his pocket. Former paramedic here. I responded to a crash on the highway that required extrication of the driver. I hop in the backseat and hold C-spine as fire starts taking off the door, cutting posts, etc. The driver starts asking where Molly and Fred are, and if these are okay. I'm confused because she was the only occupant of the car. I ask her if she's talking about the other car and she says no. These are my pet tarantula and snake. So I look in the floorboard and there are the remains of 2 terrariums. But no Molly or Fred. My husband got a call for a psychiatric emergency when working as an EMT. A kid on a 4-wheeler saw a pickup crashed into a stone wall in a field and called the police. Who called EMS? Apparently the driver had driven into the wall intentionally and stabbed himself in the abdomen as well. And then bled to death or died of head injuries until someone found him. As my so was leaning in to turn off the engine, the truck ran out of gas. That was the weirdest one he's told me. I was cleaning out a drug takeback box by my office one time. It's a metal box where people throw their old prescriptions so we can dispose of them properly. Usually people throw all manner of mundane items, sunscreen, vitamins, etc. But you run into a few opioids. On this evening, I reached into the box and felt a prick on my finger. And saw an uncapped syringe. My heart dropped. And I went to the bathroom and started squeezing blood out of the pinprick. With shaky hands, I called my dispatch and asked them to send a paramedic to the office. The medic came and consulted with the on-call doctor before she told me the chance of contracting something was very slim. I took a closer look at the syringe and saw it was some own testosterone supplement. And it had the patient's name as well as the VA hospital name. I called down to the hospital. And thankfully the guy had no communicable diseases. Sure freaked me out though. When I was a trainee, we were waiting for a suspected car thief, as far as I know from the info we got from local police anyway. When he shows up and we get him stopped, we have officers approach from behind. Well, here I come with a shotgun and take up a position on the passenger side, thinking I'm being tactical by covering this angle. Well, instead of doing a textbook felony stop, which would involve taking a defensive position and ordering him to come to us with his hands up, these officers just approach the stolen vehicle from the driver's side and order him out at gunpoint. My oh shit moment was when I realized I was downrange of all these pistols and rifles, essentially looking down their barrels. To this day, I don't know if I'm dumb for being the one guy on the passenger side, or if these officers are dumb for not doing a standard felony extraction. Luckily, the guy came quietly. Late to the party. But I will say not a cop but the victim who got to watch. I was a truck driver in my former life. Was involved in a suicide by truck incident where guy killed himself and his son. After a couple HRS, I was unhurt physically. I was in the back of a cruiser giving my statement. The MTO, for my American neighbors, rolled up at that time and got out and started taking pics of my 18-wheeler and started to do a truck inspection. The cop I was dealing with got out of his cruiser and proceeded to tear that inspector a new asshole. Basically get the hell out of my crime scene. I thanked the cop and he said he didn't know if he could actually do that. But no way was he letting charge me with anything. Me and my partner needed to make an arrest to fill our quota, so we were patrolling a known drug area in uniform for a easy one. As soon as we get there we see a plainclothes unit holding one. We go over to make sure they are all good and they ask us if we were looking. We said sure. Easy possession arrest and we didn't have to hunt. It wasn't until he was handcuffed in the back of the van and radioed in the one under when we saw the plainclothes cops laughing and waving. Driving away I thought that was odd. And then the smell hit. I can't explain to you in words what a homeless crackhead diarrhea smells like. But I will never forget it. Had to hose him down, spray him with cologne and get him new clothes. What a fucking night that was.